I wanted to walk us through what we'll be talking about today. So first, we'll be talking about common dilemmas for caregivers and their young adults that we see here in our direct clinical work, but also based on the research on supporting effectively young adults. I'll also be discussing strategies for effective communication with your young adult. And Dr. Krishnan will be discussing more about just the practicalities of systems navigation as your young adult has gotten older, and what you as caregivers can do to facilitate and support those changes. And we will also reserve some time for question and answer. And feel free to include your questions into the chat, as I believe our colleagues will continue to monitor the chat as well. So I've been working with adolescents and young adults in various capacities since I was an adolescent myself. But within the context of mental health, I've been working with this population or this age range for close to 15 years now. And really draw from evidence-based interventions. One particularly is called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And so some of the strategies that we'll be talking about today will be drawn from DBT and other research therapy interventions that have been shown to be effective for a broad spectrum of youth with mental health challenges. The transition into adulthood is a critical juncture, and it can be really confusing about how to really best support your young adult. And your perspective as a caregiver, your perspective of support may not actually always consistently be experienced or felt that way by your young person. Some of the common dilemmas that we've experienced in our clinical work and have been reported by families that we're working with are represented here. And I have included this diagram or this image of the balance in that these dilemmas are dialectics, or things that factors that can be both true at the same time, though can feel quite opposing. So for example, fostering independence and versus expecting independence prematurely. That can be experienced as how to give your young adult guidance and support and coaching or scaffolding, and help them to figure out how to be responsible, while also at the same time slowly giving your young person greater amounts of freedom. Another common dilemma is making light of problematic behaviors or problematic situations versus making too much of typical or expected behaviors. So recognizing when a behavior really crosses the line and when we might, as caregivers, want to get outside help, while also at the same time trying to recognize when what our loved one is experiencing is part of a typical process of separation and individuation from our families of origin. And then also having clear rules and expectations while consistently enforcing those rules and expectations, while also being willing to engage in negotiation with your young adult. And we encourage you to think about what might be the most effective behaviors that you as a caregiver can do, knowing that your young adult is a really important part of this equation as well. Everything that we'll be talking about today can be modified based on the age, the maturity level, the abilities, the readiness of your young person. There's no right way of doing this. Doing what is effective is what works, both in the short term, but also the long term. So let's transition to the topic of the why and how to engage in conversations with your young adult. Communication, we know, is really important. It's key. It's expected, it's normative for our teens and our young adults to become increasingly private or to want to assert independence and try to do things on their own. And as caregivers, we can express interest and begin to engage and support our young adult by bravely approaching those conversations that we might have been avoiding or we know are more hot button topics or issues. Expressing interest and showing that you are curious about how your young person is doing, how they are feeling, is really vital to preserving our relationship and fostering or expanding our relationship. We can also find additional solutions to problems that our young adult may not have thought of, or you for that matter, when we are open and willing to begin to engage in dialogue. Ultimately, for our young adults, this is their life, their path that they are trying to embark on and create for themselves. And so the conversations that you have with your young adult about your expectations, your hopes, your wishes for them may not align exactly with what they might want for themselves. However, it can set the stage as a starting point in establishing agreements or clarity in knowing what you as a family will be prioritizing and supporting them. So this could be in the areas of their health, they're establishing an occupation, independent living, or more basic things like a more effective routine or schedule for them. So how do we do this? So set yourself up for success and provide a safe space to talk about those challenging topics. So you may want to consider letting your young person know ahead of time that you want to have a conversation. Letting them know demonstrates that you care about their perspective. You don't want to surprise them or catch them off guard. And that can allow them ample time to consider questions or concerns that they might have and that they would like your support with. And it can be helpful to just frame the conversation as, I'd like to start off this conversation, and it may need for us to have multiple touch points about this particular topic. Sometimes our teens and young adults struggle with catastrophic thinking, or may not want to bring up information to you as a caregiver because they may feel like they are causing additional worry for you as a caregiver, or they might feel like a burden. And so by caregivers initiating and naming that you're open, you would like to have a conversation that may address that unstated worry. Also ensuring that you have ample time to understand and address viewpoints. We know that, particularly here in the Bay Area, families are quite busy and overloaded. And sometimes the practical challenges of having an opportunity to sit down and talk with one another can be quite hard. So setting aside and perhaps even scheduling a time, or if your teen or your young adult approaches you and you know that you don't have the bandwidth in the moment or the time to engage in a conversation, letting them know that the topic that they want to talk about is really important, and to set aside some time in the future and be very specific about when that might be. So I'm happy to talk with you about this. I can't talk to you about it right now, and perhaps we can talk about this after dinner tonight. Also, approaching your conversation with open-ended questions can be very disarming to our young people. So approaching the conversation with kindness and curiosity through more broad, open-ended questions versus questions that are more yes or no answers. So for example, you might say, I saw you came home earlier today, earlier than usual. What's up? As opposed to, were you late for school? Were you unable to fulfill that responsibility on time? And is that why you're earlier? We also know that from research, during times of stress, we might be more inclined to be more rigid or concrete in our thinking, and that can leave a greater likelihood for our young person to view our efforts in communication as lecturing, directing, or being terse. And as a caregiver, you can invite conversation during those times. And so the phrase "name it to tame it" comes to mind in that we know that when there are high stress, high emotions, our limbic system can start to pump stress hormones into our body, and that will engage our fight, flight, freeze mechanism to take over. So if we ourselves are noticing that we're feeling a more intense emotional reaction to what our young person is doing or saying, or what the situation is, to subtly, either to ourselves or even out loud, use the emotion word and use our language, our gift of language, to describe or name that emotion itself. By doing so, this actually jumpstarts our frontal lobe, the executive part of our brain that will actually serve to downregulate and calm down our emotional limbic brain. So, for example, if we are labeling our own emotion or even choose to label somebody else's emotion, for example, saying, it sounds like you're pretty exhausted and are disappointed about how that turned out. Did I get that right? That might help the other person to begin to just name that for themselves. But we could also do that for ourselves. I'm feeling pretty tired and exhausted. I'm wondering if we can find a different time to talk, because I'm recognizing that I'm not bringing forth my best self in this conversation. All right. If we can move to the next slide, Vidya. So I thought it was relevant to bring in some information about the concept of expressed emotion. This is a measure of caregivers' attitude towards a person with a mental health disorder. Expressed emotion behaviors are detailed here. Things like hostility, emotional over-involvement, critical comments. And these are attitudes, these are behaviors that aren't necessarily unique to families of individuals with mental health disorders, but they can cause of psychiatric symptoms among people who already have a vulnerability to stress. So in reflecting on some of the suggestions from my last slide, this is a gentle call out for our attendees here to really think about times where they may have accidentally, unintentionally hijacked a conversation that they were trying to have with their young adult. So in other words, this is a nudge to refrain from talking about your own experiences to excess, because it's not about you as a caregiver. Your young adults, you are here, you're wanting to support your young adults coping and adjustment and launching them successfully. And you may have relevant experiences to offer and to share with them. And sometimes the feedback that we get from our young adult clients is that the caregivers and the adults that are trying to support and offer suggestions, it can feel overbearing, and it can be quite challenging to balance the expectations from another person with what they would like for themselves. So expressing your opinion as a caregiver in balance with validation is what we would encourage you to do. And so what is validation? Vidya, if you can go on to the next slide. So validation is a process. Validation is not agreement. Validation means that you are engaging in your own behaviors that lets the other person know that what they think, what they feel, what they believe is understandable and it makes sense given their perspective and their experiences. And this is so even if you don't personally agree with those feelings, those thoughts, those beliefs. And validation is an essential essential ingredient in positive relationships that people choose to maintain. And it's also a really critical ingredient in relationships, close relationships that we may not necessarily choose to maintain, but have to. So for example, a supervisor that you might not like, but you have to regularly engage with. Validation can serve as water on a raging fire. It can be really refreshing to hear from someone you care about, I see that you're trying, you're doing your best, especially if as a young person, you don't necessarily feel that that is the case, that you are trying really hard, but things aren't turning out the way you would like them for yourself. So hearing that validation from another person who cares about you can be really, really powerful. Validation doesn't come from just what you say, but it's also how you say it. So nonverbal information, nonverbal behaviors really matter too. So paying attention to your eye contact, your body language. So for example, in a conversation when you are having crossed arms versus having open arms, if you are standing over a person versus sitting at the same eye level, can be really important to consider. Also, using utterances to demonstrate that you're listening while the other person is talking can go a long way as well. So things like nodding, saying mm-hmm or yes, I hear you, can be important too. It sends a signal to the other person that you are attending to them. You aren't necessarily agreeing, but that you are putting forth the energy and the effort to listen. Reflective statements can include repeating what you heard the other person say, or also asking for clarification. So you could say things like, I heard you say, and then summarize what they just said. Or by saying, I see that this is important to you. I thought you shared X, Y, or Z. Or I see that you're feeling blah, 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 blah. And lastly, acknowledging what is valid or factual. What you are validating is a feeling, a thought or belief, not necessarily things that are inaccurate or not factual. And then lastly, we can validate by responding with words or actions that we are taking the other person seriously. Vidya, if you can go on to the next slide. So here is a communication skill that is one of my personal favorites, and also a skill that many of my clients have said is clients and parents of clients have said is really, really effective for them. So this is a communication skill from DBT that can be, the mnemonic is Dear Man. And this is a skill that we can use when we are trying to advocate for ourselves and are trying to ask for what we need. The DEAR, the describe, express, ask, reward, is what you say. And the M, the A, the N, mindful, appear confident, negotiate, is how you say it. So when we are using this skill, we are focusing on describing exactly what the situation is that is bothering you and sticking to the facts and using specifics. The E, the express step, refers to expressing your feelings using I statements. So I feel X, Y, or Z. And we are taking the time to express how we feel because we are we cannot necessarily assume that the other person, the other party, knows exactly how we feel. One of the tips or potential pitfalls in using the express step is using the word should, because it can sound or can feel blaming or judgmental for the other person. And then A stands for asking for what you would like, clearly and directly. And then I oftentimes get questions about the reward or reinforce step. So why would we want to do that? And in that step, we are describing what the other person will get if they follow through on what you're asking for. We know that because behavior change is hard, humans are creatures of habit, that even with changes that an individual might want to make for themselves, those changes can be quite difficult. So when another person is asking for somebody else to change, knowing what would be a reason for that change and what would be serving for the person who is changing, and being explicit about that can be helpful. So an example of this, from just a personal example, is just the use of the Dear script. So like I said, I use the Dear Man quite regularly myself. I used this just recently with my own partner. And in that, I had indicated, I noticed that I was feeling pretty frustrated about a situation that was coming up fairly repeatedly. Here's an example of the describe step. We got an email from school that we need to respond to. Express, I feel rushed and disorganized this morning, and I assumed that you were going to get to it last night when it was brought up. Can you work on responding to it this morning, and let me know in the future about what your intentions are, so there isn't confusion about who's taking care of what. And that was the ask. And then the reward is, if you send the message, you'll already be on your computer and more easily able to get to your virtual meeting on time, and I can focus on other parts of things that we need to take care of. I want to acknowledge that this is a skill that requires some forethought and practice. And so you might want to practice using this communication skill with topics that are more lower stakes, or with people for whom mistakes, or as you're practicing, may not be as impactful. So for example, asking a stranger for a recommendation to a good restaurant, or asking your neighbor to walk your dog or feed your cat. Vijay, to the next slide, please. So fostering a supportive environment. Looking for opportunities for you and your teen, or excuse me, your young adult, to establish agreements on what to work on. And you might utilize the dear man skill for figuring out what you will be prioritizing. Also, another suggestion, another strategy is to look for opportunities to offer choices. So if for you as a caregiver, you have hopes, wishes, or expectations for your young person, and there's challenge with making steps and efforts towards those steps. You may want to limit your choices to to 2 or 3 things that would be acceptable for you as a caregiver. In addition, looking for ways to provide regular feedback about how your young person is doing in terms of making steps towards those goals. So, for example, identifying positive steps, especially when they're initiating something new, can go a really long way. So, for example, saying, I see that you're putting effort to prepare to get to your classes on time this semester. As a parent, there's a lot that you can't control, and I think it can be a helpful thing to really consider focus on what you can control. There are lots of supports that are available here in your community, and sometimes when things become highly stressful, it can be challenging to really effectively utilize those supports, like church, neighbors, friends, etc. We know that for the caregivers and families who show up for mental health interventions, these are folks who oftentimes have had a long history of trying to navigate educational or mental health medical systems, and are also quite willing to support other people, but sometimes the oxygen mask is not necessarily put on themselves first. So know that in times that you've helped others, others may be willing to really support you too. Vidya, next slide. With the question of when to seek out professional help, we really encourage parents and caregivers to really listen to your instincts. Your teen is the expert on themselves, but also you as caregivers have borne witness to their strengths, their successes, and also their struggles. And so if you have that gut reaction that you may want to seek out more direct interventions and professional expertise and opinions, then do so. We also encourage you to think about different markers of your young adult's functioning, whether or not it's concern about sleep or eating, their ability to actively engage in their academics or work, but also any changes in these areas, and also the area of their engagement with peers, friends, family members. If there are marked changes and declines, then that can be a strong indicator that that additional help may be warranted. Here at CHC, we do offer free 30-minute consultations to young adults and parents, as well as other caregivers this can be a really helpful time during those consultations to begin to put together an action plan or to think through aloud what questions that you may have been holding on to. We also have a resource library on our website. And one of the services that we provide within clinical services is caregiver support and coaching. And this is not a service that is necessarily individual therapy for a parent or caregiver, but the goal is actually to really provide strategies to facilitate the achievement of your young adults' goals and families' goals. All right. Vidya, I think it's on to you.
Thank you very much, Patty, and thank you all for working with us to kind of answer some of the questions that Patty asked in the beginning. I noticed that there were a lot of people talking about children that they had who had autism or psychosis, questions about bipolar disorder, ADHD. The reason I bring that up is because many of you may be in situations where you and your family member, your young adult, or your to-be young adult are involved with multiple different, maybe caregivers, maybe clinics, maybe organizations. You have support services, all of those kinds of things. And the unfortunate thing about systems sometimes is that each system has its own rules and expectations and things like that, and we are not always fully aware of it. I would say that the first thing, which is why I said act now, ask now, is one of the first things as a parent, a caregiver, a support person you want to do is to understand what you're really working with at this particular point. So first things first is that find out if the system or where your family member is seen has any limitations as far as care provision goes. Some clinics have rules. They'll say, we can only see somebody for 6 months or 9 months or a year. And no matter how old they are or how young they are, we cannot see them for more than that amount of time, which is always useful to know as far as planning goes. The other thing also is age restriction. It's interesting because some places will cut off at 18 years of age, some go to 22, some go to 25, some go to 26. It's really important to know with the various services that you're engaged in, if there is an age cutoff after which you will not be able to access services from that space. And the other thing you also useful to know, because if you are navigating this, and some of you also indicated that you had more than one person you were supporting through this process, it's really important to know that if say the clinic you're connected with will not see someone once they turn 25, say for example, and you have to go somewhere else, will they support by giving you a list of other places you can go, places you can go and get help? Will they provide you referrals, or will they connect you and make sure that there is no gap in services or care that your family member or you, for that matter, are getting? And another really, really critical thing, if any of you have been engaged with the emergency medical system, and whether this is for medical system or mental health, when I say this, obviously I'm talking about it from a mental health lens, but many of these things are not uncommonly true for medical problems as well, like primary care, or if someone in your family has a medical condition, right, that they need ongoing care for. Many of these things are applicable in terms of supporting your young adult for those kinds of things too. So these are all good questions to ask, no matter where and how you're engaging with the system. And the same thing is true for emergency resources. Pediatric emergency rooms or hotlines are very different from ones that are available to young adults or the ones that are available to adults over the age of 25. So what you also want to do today or soon is make a list of what kind of resources are available to you in the shorter term. If you need to call somebody to reach out for help, who will you call? Where will you call? Where will you go? It's always nice to have a small cheat sheet in your pocket or on your phone, so that in an emergency, you're not looking for these resources. And that's really always important to secure. So these, I would say, are things that you should do soon or immediately if you've not already done so. And that's really very, very valuable. Another thing that I would kind of is keep records and take names. What I mean by that is if you've not already done so, one of the things is that you have been in your children's life, now young adults' life, from the time they started having their struggles, and you know the entire story. It is very challenging to expect an 18, 19, 20, 24-year-old to literally parachute into the situation and know all of that information. And I bet you anything, I'm a physician, and I do ask them those questions. And I find it very often what happens with young adults is, oh, my mom should know the answer, or my dad knows the answer, or my neighbor knows this, or my priest knows this, or different people are holding this information. I have done this for my children, and I think it's really useful if for your child or a caregiver or your young adult, make a timeline, of all of their mental health and medical issues, whether they were small, time limited, they came and went and they're all resolved now, or if these are lifelong issues, really keep at this point, initially I started it when they were younger, in a paper format. I have everything now in an e-format, which is easily pullable. I can just pull it up on my phone and I keep adding to it as new things happen. It should include the name of every doctor, every therapist, every clinic, every organization you spoke with. You should have all of that information. What did you speak with them? What did they say or do? What did they recommend? Hospitals that you may have been admitted for, or medical procedures. One always assumes, yeah, the hospital has the record. Yes, they do. But if you need it on the tip of your fingers, you can't run to the hospital because they all have timelines. They'll take 15 days or 20 days to get that information back to you. So it is important to have that in your fingertips and saying, okay, if I was in a hospital, this was the date I was in the hospital from. I was admitted on this date. I was released on this date. Or this is when I went to the emergency room. It's really important to have that information. And any organizations or services you were referred to, say, for example, this is not really a doctor or a therapist, but maybe you went for a support group there, or you went somewhere because you got occupational therapy or vision therapy or something like that. Where you went, who helped you, and what type of support you got, whether you paid for these services or not, or somebody else paid for them, does not matter. It's useful to have that information ready so that you have a full comprehensive list of all the things you engaged in or were engaged in as a part of this process. I would say the same thing is true as far as school goes, because some of our children are also getting support, or the people we are supporting or caring for, it could be a sibling, it could be somebody else, maybe getting special supports through school, through a 504 plan or an IEP. So they will give us signed paperwork copies of this, or e-copies of it as is relevant in your case. It is really useful to keep copies of those kinds of things. And the good news is that the school district keeps these pieces of information, even if your young person is no longer affiliated. So many of these things, if you've not already done so, it is not too late. It is never too late to go back and put all of this together to the best of your abilities, because what you can do as almost a gift on their 18th birthday or whenever it is that they need this information is nicely packaged up with a bow. You have this ready so that even if they don't remember a single thing, it's all right there. They can look it up anytime they want, and it's at their fingertips. And if you can include all of this with addresses and phone numbers, it would be even more special, because then they really know if, oh, this is the school district, this is the contact person, this is the phone number. If I cannot find some paper I need to for some application, I know where to go because it's right here in this particular document. And the same thing I would say is if your family member is getting any medication support services, and it isn't, again, not just psychiatry or mental health, but for any ailment, it is really useful to keep a list of everything that you've tried. All right. We tried all of these things. This is the dose. This is how long we tried it. This is the ways in which it helped, or this is the ways in which it did not help at all. Never going there again. These are the side effects they experienced. And also it's useful. This is the allergies they have because we tried it. Oh my God, they had the worst reaction ever. Say, for example, always useful to know so that you're not going to go back and reinvent that wheel over and over and over again, right? The reason I put what pharmacy did you use, if you have a home pharmacy and you got a lot of your refills from there, that's super helpful to make a notation. You know what, generally speaking, this is where we got a lot of our refills. It's not every so often if you got it from a different place. That's not that important. The reason I bring up the pharmacy is so many times in a pinch where family members have not remembered what the medicine has been, or the young adult cannot remember what the medicine is. If they can tell me, oh my God, we always go to this pharmacy, I can just pick up the phone, call the pharmacist, and they have a list of every medicine you've picked up from there. And that is a very, very easy way for you to get that information. So even if you don't have the list, if you have the name of the pharmacy where you filled it, a doctor or a provider or a nurse can just quickly call them and get that information, and we're ready and good to go. And like I said, keep a record of this in whatever format is useful. And you can even now go back and make a request of any place you've been cared for at, and they can make all the records available. So it's not too late to put a binder together with all of this information. And for those of you who are not yet engaged, NAMI, which is National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, has a really nice organizing tool on their website, which actually allows you to organize all this information for people who have mental health challenges, which is where I borrowed a lot of this from. And you can actually, it has got categories and you can put information. So it tells you what to gather, how to gather it, how to keep it all together. And they have parent support groups where they actually coach you through how to support a client or a young adult who has serious mental health issues, like if you have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, which I noticed some of you mentioning. They have tools that they make available to support a person through something like that as a caregiver. The reason I brought along the adulting road is this is basically a list of all the things a young adult at some point needs to know or needs to learn to be able to be successful independently in this universe. And the reason I brought it up is twofold. Number one is all of us, every single one of us, whether we have mental health issues or not, have been in some way taught or coached in all of this. None of us were born with this knowledge or information. We've all learned it somewhere along the way. So I would like you to use this list in two ways. Number one, it gives you a sense of trying to guess where your young adult is in this process. What can they do among these things? What can they not do among these things? But you can also think of this as a list, as a starting point, because what every one of us wants to do is, are we going to be 1,000% successful in getting our young adult to do every one of these things, especially when they're also struggling with a mental health issue like today? Probably not. But if you know approximately the various domains that you're working on, what you can do is, as and when the opportunity presents itself, you can move them slowly along this pathway towards greater independence in those areas. And to be honest with you, one of the skills that Patty was talking about earlier today, like Dear Man, would be a good way if you're trying to get them to maybe make their own lunch or make lunch for another person or go to the grocery store to get some groceries for the family. Sometimes it's useful to couch it in all the ways that Patty was talking about, along with what's in it for you. You know what, why don't you go to the grocery store? Obviously, I'm not doing the full Dear Man here, but you would do it. And then you can throw in a reward by saying, you know, while you're at it, go get yourself this little treat because you're helping me with groceries here. And here's the list, here's the money. It teaches, it touches on so many different skills here if your young adult is able to do that thing. So I wanted to bring that up, you know, things like hygiene, personal appearance, day-to-day activities, housekeeping, right? How do you keep things clean? How do you manage things around you? Food management, which is a huge job in itself. The reason I bring up pregnancy, parenting, childcare is knowing and understanding how all of these things work. And if you either accidentally or intentionally, your young adult finds themselves in these situations, how do you deal with this? Because that's its own thing. We also talked briefly about emergency and safety skills in terms of in an emergency, either for themselves or somebody they're caring for or somebody who's around them. Do they know what they need to do, who to call, where to go, how to get help in a interpersonal skills, right? Going and asking for directions, going to the bank, going to the grocery store and asking other people to help or support you. Community resources, what's available out there? Who can I reach out to? Where can I go find organizations like, say, Parents Helping Parents, knowing about these kinds of things? How does one manage money? How to go about securing housing? whether the housing is paid for by you, if you have to be independent, you have to manage lots of things around housing, transportation. If someone's going to be doing more education, how do I plan that? How do I work with the community organizations? How do I work with the school systems, the college systems, the community college systems? How are these, what are options available to me to be able to pay for these kinds of things? How do I get a job? How do I keep a job? What kind of resources are out there to help me with both of those things in terms of making a resume, going to an interview, learning the skills necessary to be successful? And of course, the biggies, the really, really big ones, which are healthcare and legal issues. These are all things that young adults eventually need to learn to some degree. None of us need to be an expert. Not all of us know. Even all of us on this call don't know all of these things to a great degree, but we do need to know each of them enough to get by. And what you have to figure out is how much does your young adult need to know this? And how much do you need to know to be able to support it? Because some of these are also things, if you are trying to support a young adult who's not able to do these things by themselves, what do you need to know to be able to support them in these general domains? It is definitely something to think about. Two important things. The reason I said congratulations, you're 18 is quite a few of you mentioned that you have supporting young adults who are already over the age of 18. The first thing to think about is that if the loved one you have, for any reason at any point, once they're 18 or older, either cannot manage their own medical care or cannot independently make financial decisions, you would need to think about whether a conservatorship, either for decision-making or for finances, is something that is important or necessary for them, so that till they can be in a better place, somebody else can help them or take over this for them to support them through this particular process. So that's definitely one thing to think about. The second thing is, once you turn 18, it's also important to make sure that there's a lot of paperwork that a person needs to sign into to be able to manage their own medical care or to manage their own. So they basically, what they do is, instead of you consenting to things for them, they are able to consent to things for themselves. So that's what you're looking for. And you want to make sure both of those things happen at some point at the time that they turn 18 and they're signed up in all the places you're connected with, so that they communicate with them, they directly support them and are able to help them. And everybody in the team is able to talk to each other. Information exchange. So one of the things in US, as in the United States, as far as law goes, is that once a person turns 18, if they are not under a conservatorship, they have the right to privacy of their medical, psychological information. There is a few exceptions, of course, and most of those are safety-based exceptions. But in all other ways, you are not directly able to be involved in decision-making, medication, support services, what the next steps are, where they go, where they get help, which is a very, very big change. And as we've been discussing, some of the young adults that we are involved with still do need that help, still do need that support, still do need that coaching, either to make appointments or to get medication refills or to make or to navigate the system, because they have told them, you need to go to this clinic and do this thing, and they may not know how to do it. So really making sure that there are means where there is a legal form signed, where a designated adult, it doesn't have to be a parent, it doesn't have to be a caregiver, it can just be a responsible adult who is given permission to communicate with the healthcare team, where this person can reach out to the healthcare team can reach out to this person, and all of us together can support the young adult. And it can allow you to get healthcare updates. It can allow you to plan together about living as well as safety kinds of things, make appointments, medication refills, attend meetings, and participate generally in medication, in various healthcare decisions as they become relevant, right? And one of the things is that it is really important to carry this information for the young adult, to carry this information in a manner that is easily shareable. The first one I talked about was a whole document, right? Which may be run into thousands of pages or hundreds of pages if there've been lots of things happening. But I'm thinking here of something that can easily fit on just an index card, or on a single page on a cell phone. It's even a photograph that you've taken that you have in your photos and you've labeled. that you have a list of the allergies, the names of the medicines that you're taking with all the doses, the name and contact information of the doctor, the hospital, or the clinic that you have, the address and phone number of the pharmacy, the easily accessible crisis hotline number or text number so that you can reach out from anywhere, and to make 1000% sure an in case of emergency phone number is populated on the phone contact list, which is what EMTs look for, so that if something were to happen to a young adult, they are able to look and find this information from their phone or their device or from a card as to who this person is to be contacted in emergency, and which is something that's very useful. And it is many times it is useful that an adult helped populate them and have it with them as they are turning into young adults. And the last one is, it's very hard for many people, if they're on medicines, to remember to take their medicines on a regular basis. So what you can do there is to make sure that the young adult is, even before they turn 18, or even if they're 18, to work on getting the simplest regimen. You want to take the pills, if it's possible, the least number of times a day. You want to make sure that they have maybe phone alarms or some kind of daily reminders if they're going to be taking it themselves. Pill organizers, which are available for $5 or $10 at most pharmacies, which basically say AM, PM, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you put the pills together ahead of time for the week so that you never forget to take anything. Some insurances, especially for people who cannot remember to take their medicines regularly, will actually put medicines that need to be taken at the same time in a blister pack, so that you just have to open it. It says Monday morning. You just open it, you take it, it's already prepackaged. This is particularly valuable where either the family members cannot help, or sometimes people don't have family members. A kid is their young adult is living in a shared living arrangement or a group home or something, and then there is nobody else who can help with this. And of course, like everything else, practice makes perfect, right? You do it over and over again, you get better at it over time. Parting thought, absolutely the last one. If you don't have permission, you don't have consent, your young adult doesn't want you to participate in your medical decision-making, but you are concerned about them, you're seeing some really concerning signs, it's really important to remember that the release of information form that you sign is only so that people like me or people like Patty, what we can share or we can tell you. Nothing in the world prevents you from reaching out to an organization, a clinic, a caregiver, or doctor on behalf of your loved one and tell them, oh my God, I'm really worried about my loved one. Bad things are happening. This is what's going on. I just wanted you to know. Will you get information back from the clinic or the hospital? No, because if there is no release, you won't get it. But we, both Patty and I, really value that type of information, whether the consent is in place or not, because it really makes us be able to support your loved one, even if there is not ability for us to reach back to you. So that was where, and I wanted to make sure that all of you knew that, so that you're always able to advocate, always able to share that piece of information and make sure that your young loved one is getting the care and the support that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vidya and Patty. I have learned so much. There was so much I didn't know. And there is a question. I wanted to invite our attendees to write their questions either in the chat or in the Q&A, because Vidya and Patty, one of them at least, is able to stay for some questions. So I'm going to read a question that came in just a minute ago. What do we parents do with the release of information paper? Do we give it to the doctor's office, the pharmacy, the school, etc., or just show it to them when we need information?
The release of information, usually what ends up happening is whichever organization you are associated with will have a release of information legal form at their end. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to fill it out and you're supposed to return it back to them so it's logged into their system, so that every time you contact that organization, they know that you are an authorized person to make contact, to make communication. And pharmacy, the good thing is that pharmacies don't have a release of information requirement, but schools have their own, all kinds of medical and psychological clinics have their own. So the unfortunate reality is that every place you're involved in will have their own form that you'll have to sign. So there's a lot of signing in this process, and the release has to be signed by the young adult and then to be turned back into whichever organization that you are, and to make sure that it is with as many or every one of the providers that you're involved with.
Excellent. You know what you mentioned about getting organized, I was thinking, yes, we do the same when we talk about IEPs, and it's the beginning of summer soon. You will have time on your hands, so I'm so glad that you're encouraging people. It is true. It's very helpful to have things at your fingertips and to offer it as a present to your young adult, of course. I'm hoping for more questions. I had a couple, but I wanted attendees to post them in the chat or in the Q&A. And what I'm going to do real quick is launch the poll for feedback. Now, here we go. Please consider answering the questions. And I might as well ask my questions because I don't see anything coming up. It's a question for Patty, for Patrice. You were saying, I got a little confused because you were talking about expressed emotions, and it's true. Sometimes we feel like it's too much we're expressing, but at the same time, you wanted us to name our emotions. So tell me more about the difference between. Yeah, I was a little confused. Like,
Sure.
yes, I get there. And then, but you just said I need to say it.
Yes, so I can understand how that can be confusing. So expressed emotion, I wonder, Vidya, can you go back to that slide for some of our attendees who are more visual learners like myself? So expressed emotion in and of itself is more of like a research construct, right? Where when people were doing this research on expressed emotion, they had identified how a family member talks about their loved one with mental health challenges. If there is more criticism, if there is over-involvement in which the family member feels like the young person is not doing their part, right? So if there's this sense of like blaming, that these are things that are predictors of relapse or predictors of negative outcomes for the person with mental health challenges. So how do we balance that with being able to acknowledge our own emotions that we might be having, given that this is a challenging situation? We want to say, for example, like, I feel frustrated, as opposed to yelling out of frustration, right? Or I feel worried about this decision you just recently made, versus taking over and not allowing your young person to practice and to make those mistakes, right? So it's not just what you say, but it's also the behavior in and of itself. And the labeling of the emotion is more in the context of the conversations that you're having with somebody.
Okay, I got it. Thanks. Thank you. We have someone who asks, do you take patients? So, right?
Yes, CHC takes patients.
Yeah. The address is on so somebody's asking for this, the address. Maybe we can move to the last slide for CHC. I think it has the address right there. I know you guys are in Palo Alto. Excellent. Any other questions? And then, right. Any other questions? Any other comments? If you wish to pose a question, yourself. Okay, so another question. Do you take medical? And then we have questions also coming. Do you take medical?
So we do take Medi-Cal. Our Medi-Cal practice is in mostly centered around San Jose. The call center for Santa Clara County is where our contract is with Santa Clara County, and the call center is the one that directs people to the direction that they need to go to. So that would be, so you can contact CHC, but also the call center for Santa Clara County, or the access number is another way to go about and request these services.
Excellent. What ages do you work with? I think you mentioned it, but would you please tell us the age range of the people you work with?
Through the age of 25 for the identified young person. However, we also do work with caregivers and parents of the wide range. So, but the identified client has to be 25 or younger.
25 or younger, and then their support system or their caregiver is part of your effort. Excellent. More questions are coming in the chat. Let's see. Yes, so do you take caregivers? Do you take caregivers? Like, yeah. So they work with caregivers. That is correct. Anything else you see, Patty, please? No?
That's all.
Right. I didn't know NAMI had an organizing tool. I'm going to go and check it out right after this. I wanted to... translation of question, just a minute. How can we ask about their own experiences? Somebody is asking.
I think it refers to maybe giving some examples about how to ask questions to your young adults so they could be able to explain more about their day. Yeah.
I think what Patty said is that the most important thing I think to come about is to come about, number one, always is time, because that is not always a luxury that all of us have. The job of caregiving takes so much, both physically and mentally, out of us that sometimes there's not the time. So making that safe time, making that safe space, and not only use it as a mechanism to just conduct business where you're trying to get stuff done or to negotiate the co-living situation or what each of us owes with each other, but to actually both, it's that simple thing, right? For example, if someone walks into your door in your home, one of our family members, instead of the first question being, did you get milk? The first question is, how was your day? That is what we're talking about, is that there's opportunity in every single conversation to be able to do that. For people who are not, because I know sometimes we have young adults who may not be verbal or who may not be able to express themselves through the use of language. And in those instances, I've actually encouraged family to use music or the type of shows they're watching or the way they're moving about the world, because everybody, and if any, in the ways they are, because you know them, you've been with them for a while, using those other kinds of nonverbal cues to put together an understanding of their internal experience, either based on facial expression or what they're liking to doing, what they're enjoying, what they're eating, what they're willing to do. All of those are ways, but ultimately it's time, it's curiosity, and it is kind of keeping your antenna open for all the ways in which information is coming in your direction, to be very receptive for it. All of those would be good ways.
And not using the word should. It's amazing how should you should, or you should have done this. Sometimes we're just helping them fix what happened and they hate it.
Yeah, that word itself can feel like a finger wave, even though there's none of that.
So give us another couple of open-ended questions, for example, like scenarios, like, you know, you can tell your young person is upset about something. How would you approach them? What would you say?
So I would say, you look a little upset. I'm noticing that your eyebrows are furrowed or that your arms are crossed. So naming the behaviors that make you as a parent or caregiver think that they're upset, and say, did I get that right? Or what's up? And it's all about the tone. It's all about the volume. So if you notice what I said, there was the sound of my voice went, oh, what's up? As opposed to what's up, right? It's very different.
Right, right. We're having comments that say, thank you so much, we need you back. we need more of this. And just to respect our speakers' time, I'm gonna thank them and let them go. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely evening and take care of each other. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.